my name is Richard Bennett, and this is the web series Vocations, where we try to introduce jobs to the general public and give you an idea of what they are. My first guest is my big brother, David Bennett, for whom I've known for 39 years. And David is originally from Irving, Texas. He's a 1973 graduate from MacArthur High School. Currently, he's in the Special Education Department with the Bryan ISD, and he's stationed at Rudder High School. He's married to Amy Robbins of McAllen, Texas, and has 4 grown children, all of whom who work, including Chris, the businessman, Kara, the medical doctor, Cassidy, a former teacher and now a full-time homemaker, and Casey, a nurse. Welcome to Vocations.
Thank you, little brother.
So we are going to spend a few moments talking about David's past before what he does at the present. And before you became an educator at age 55, what did you do for a living?
Well, I was a retail manager for over 30 years. I went to school at Abilene Christian University, and after my first 2 years, I met and married my wife, Amy, and went to work for Albertsons. Since I was a married man, I had to bring home the bacon, so I worked full-time and then went to school part-time for 4 years and graduated in 1979. Took me 6 years to get through college, and then I went to the management training program with Albertsons and worked with them until 1986. During that time, one of my neighbors in Lake Jackson had a son who worked for me at Albertsons, and he just happened to be the manager of a Walmart store, the local Walmart. So he convinced me that I needed to come to work for Walmart instead, so I spent 18 and a half years with Walmart. So all told, I spent over 30 years in the retail business. By the time my youngest son was in his senior year of college, I told my wife Amy that, Mama, Daddy needs to find something he likes doing for a living. I worked with some great people in the retail business, but I didn't care for the business too much itself because as a manager, you're
responsible for everything.
Well, it's not the responsibility part so much as it is just the demands it makes on your time.
You got to be there.
Well, yeah, you got to be there. It's nights, weekends, holidays, summers, Christmases, Thanksgivings, and things like that. So I was ready for a change. I had actually considered being a teacher when I was a younger man, but I was afraid I wouldn't have the patience for it. In fact, for a short time, I considered becoming a band director, but I decided that I would rather do something else, and because I could just see myself putting some kid's head through a wall. But after being married, at that time I'd been married about 35 years, and raising 4 kids, and then working with the public and the people of Walmart, I found out that I had a lot more patience than I realized, and so I went back and got my alternative certification, thinking that I'd be able to get a job as a science teacher, but lo and behold, that didn't work. So I went back and got an additional certification in special education, and boom, had a job in education just like that. So it's been kind of a circuitous path, if you will. And you've been working with them for 9 years now, right? Yeah, I've been in education now for 9 years.
Okay, so you're about midway through this latest career.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I guess so.
Tell us about your financial situation. How does it treat you?
Well, I make a teacher's wage, but in my current position in the special education department as an ARD Facilitator, my contract is longer than the general teacher's contract. Most teachers in our school district have a contract of 182 or 183 days, I think it is. Maybe it's 187, I forget. But as an ARD Facilitator, I'm on contract for 202 days. So it was pretty sweet when I first got the position. I got an 8% pay increase, but it's because I was working 8% more days. So
now that you introduced the ARD Facilitator, what is an ARD Facilitator?
An ARD Facilitator is responsible for having the annual meetings for students who receive special education services. An ARD, And the title of Art Facilitator is kind of unique in the state of Texas. ARD stands for Admission, Review, and Dismissal. And Texas is the only state in the union that uses that terminology. Other states in the country call it IEP, which stands for Individualized Educational Program. Well, in Texas, we have ARD meetings, so we can develop IEPs.
Now, you have a lot of meetings.
Have a lot of meetings. Every student that receives special education services has at least one meeting per year. And sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 meetings for some students who need to have tweaks made in their individualized education programs. So on my campus, we have about 1,700 students, and we have about 180 students who receive special education services. And then that number fluctuates during the course of the year because we do live in a very transient society, a very mobile society. People are changing, picking up and moving all the time. Or we also have a residential facility in our community for students who have been taken out of their homes for whatever reason. Either they're having legal troubles, or they've gotten in trouble with the law, or their parents have gotten in trouble with the law, or they've been neglected, or what have you. So for that reason, we have meetings for those guys too.
So you're an ARD, an ARD facilitator.
Yeah.
Now, I know these public schools have counselors. Do you act as these special students' counselor?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. I'm not an academic counselor. That's a whole nother ball of wax.
Okay.
I'm just a paper pusher for the special education department.
Okay. Now, why do you have all these meetings with these teachers and facilitators and...
Well, these meetings are mandated by law. It's a federal law. Special education falls under the IDEA Act. And I'd have to look that up. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. But it's basically, special education is mandated by the federal government, and every year you have to have a meeting to review their academic progress over the past year, and then take a look at their current program and see if we need to adjust it and need to make any plans for the coming year. So basically, we're all about trying to make sure that the student is able to access the curriculum and be academically and socially successful in school. So.
I remember, of course you remember too, we had a neighbor down the street whose name was Debbie Martin, and she had cerebral palsy, and she was confined to a wheelchair. And she could barely speak, and she was a little bit older than we were.
Yeah.
But I do remember going down to her school one day. I think Daddy gave her a ride down there, or else picked her up. But I went with him, and we got to see her school, which was kind of out of the way. It was almost in the country then. This is over 50 years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
And when we had country around here.
Yeah.
But she was. It's like and plus, you and I both went through 12 years of public school, where we really didn't see any of that.
That's correct.
We didn't see any wheelchairs or any blind kids or any crippled kids.
Right.
I don't know if they call it that anymore. Disabled kids. And it was almost like they were separated from the general population.
Right.
So.
And the whole purpose of special education is to try to educate these students who have disabilities with the general education population as much as possible, to the maximum extent appropriate to the needs of the student, is some of the terminology that's built into that. Sounds like I'm
lawyer talk.
I'm reading from, that's part of the blurbs that show up. That's part of the assurances. It is our job to make sure that our students are streamlined, is what they used to call it, or they also call it inclusion. They want them to be included and have as much access to the curriculum as appropriate to their needs. And most of our students are accommodated that way. They're actually in general education classes with their general education peers, but they do receive some accommodations to help them access the curriculum. But then we do have students who have more severe disabilities, and they either wind up in resource classes, which is a special education class, but still out there in the hallways where the general education classes
they get
are
to see their peers.
Sure, they get to see their peers between passing periods. Or we do have some students who have more severe disabilities And because of the nature of their disabilities and the need for privacy, because we provide toileting and things like that, they're in a kind of a different part of the classroom or a different part of the building.
Right.
But then as much as possible, we get them out there and they take PE and they go to elective classes and that sort of thing, usually with the accompaniment of a paraprofessional to make sure that they're safe and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's something we didn't see when I was in school.
Yeah.
I knew that we had some remedial classes. I remember Miss Key,
Yeah.
my math teacher,
Yeah.
talking about how she had to teach a remedial math class. It just drove her crazy. But that was just for guys that had difficulty dealing with math. But kids who actually had diagnosed learning disabilities or other disabilities, we never saw.
Yeah.
So things have changed.
Yeah. Good. Well, I guess that's good.
I think it is.
You know.
I think it is.
Now, what do most of these students go into after graduation?
Most of them wind up either going to work in the community, or some of them will actually go ahead and go into college. They go to trade school or go to college. We have the TSTC, which is a technical education in Waco. And then we're also, our local community college, Blinn College, is working in conjunction with Texas A&M University to develop a new campus in our community for technical education, welding, construction, wiring, HVAC, and that sort of thing. So a lot of our kids they become blue-collar workers.
So
They get
they'll
up
be
there.
in demand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is probably for many of them, this will be their last shot at education.
Formal education. Although, if they go to tech school, that education does continue. And part of why our stuff is so important is because even though special education services end at high school graduation, they can still take their accommodations to their colleges or their trade schools and say, hey, when I test, I need to be testing in a small environment with a small group, or I need to have extra time for testing, or I need to have the test read to me, that sort of thing. Those accommodations are available to the students.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone thinking about going into this kind of work, let me ask you this. What kind of person would you recommend for this job?
Well, a person just like me.
Okay.
You need to be detail-oriented because there's a lot that goes into these meetings. When you prepare the documentation for these meetings, they are legal documents because it's like an agreement between the school district and the parent that we will be providing these services to your student while they're on our campus. And it's really pretty important. And I was talking to a special education director for another school district one time, and she said that there's up to 1,000 ways to make clerical errors, literally 1,000 ways, different ways you can make clerical errors on this ARD documentation. So you need to really know what the heck you're doing and make sure you cross all your T's and dot your I's and check all the little appropriate boxes and that sort of thing.
Well, what happens if you don't?
Well, thank goodness in our district, I go ahead and lock the document down and go ahead and print it up and submit it to our special education office. And we have a couple of ladies there that review the documentation to make sure that it's correct. And then if I've made a mistake, then I make the correction and I notify the parents that, hey, I made a clerical error here. It's not going to have an impact on the services your student receives, but I forgot to check this box. And I send them a copy of the original and I send them a copy of the corrected page so that they'll see that, and if they have any questions, they can contact me for clarification about the correction I had to make.
Why don't you tell about your first year of teaching?
Well, my first year of teaching, it was not the experience I expected, and I'm sure that's probably the case for all the teachers out there. My first year was total survival mode. I was a co-teacher. Actually, I was hired mid-year, and so I was hired in January, and so my first spring semester, I was a co-teacher in 2 math classes, 2 geometry classes, 2 world geography classes, and 2 English 1 classes. And managed to get through that okay. I modified some tests and read some tests and that sort of thing and pulled kids out for small group instruction and what have you. Then my first full year of being a teacher, I was a co-teacher in 3 biology classes, and then I had 3 resource biology classes where I was the teacher of record. So I guess I should explain that co-teach means that I was in a general education classroom with a general education teacher, and I was there to provide special education services to those students. And so in those co-teach classes, there were 2 certified teachers in there, but the general education teacher was the teacher of record. Now, in the resource classroom, which was a special education classroom, I was the teacher of record, and it was my job to make sure that they received all the modifications that they needed on the curriculum. The resource classes are for students who have more profound learning disabilities, but don't really need to be in the life skills setting with the children with profound learning disabilities or with profound physical disabilities, for that matter. So my job was to modify the curriculum and help them access the information that we tried to teach in our biology class, and try to get them ready for the state testing, which is another whole that's another hot mess.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that in a minute here.
Okay.
But now that you've got 30 years of retail behind you, how much do you think that helped you towards being a teacher?
I guess probably part of it was just it gave me time to grow up. It gave me time to realize that where I'm seeing these kids right now in high school is just a snapshot. It kind of gives me a longer range perspective, because I know that I'm just going to have them for a short period of time in their lives. They probably won't even remember my name, 10 years from now. But in their lives, 10 years from now, they'll be in their mid-20s. They'll either be working, they might be married, raising kids, and they'll be taking on adult responsibilities. So my job, I think, was to try to establish a relationship with the kiddos. And I think it gave me a little more patience, because I realized that this kid that's, a screw up right now is probably going to be a different person 10 years from now. And I need to have a little more patience and extend them a little more grace, because they do have value as a person. And they will eventually grow out of the hot mess of being a teenage kid, being in high school, and eventually they'll actually turn into a human being.
Well, you had 4 kids of your own that you put through that, or raised, so I guess that gave you a lot of insight.
I'm not sure who put who through what. But.
Now, let's talk about the test. The STAR test and the TAC test, or whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
Now, what do your special students need for this test they've got to take?
Well, of course, I'm of an age where we didn't do any standardized high-stakes testing when I was in high school. A lot of this comes down to the federal government wanting to make sure that we're doing everything we can do to get these kids ready to master their curriculum. And so it's a way to tie, it ties money. It really comes down to money, federal money.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's why they call it high-stakes testing, is because
if they don't pass, the schools will get the money.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a penalty if the students are not performing on standardized state testing. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. I think it's almost like the school year revolves around STAR testing now. Because at least at the high school level, we test English 1 and English 2 in April, and then we test biology, Algebra 1, and U.S. history in May, the first week of May. And it's like after state testing is over, the kids think they're done for the year, even though they've still got 2 or 3 weeks left in their six weeks, and they've still got semester finals to take. It's like once state testing is over with, we're done. I'm checking out.
No, you're not checking out.
My summer's begun already, and it's kind of a.
Well, that's new to me.
It was kind of a surprise to me too, because obviously, getting into the game as late as I did not realize what this state testing was all about, and what the ramifications it would have on the passage of the school year.
On these state tests, are they modified for your extra
Used to be.
needs? Used to be.
Used to be.
What happened?
Well, in 2014, our federal government, in its great wisdom, did away with modified
Wait,
testing.
you just said government and wisdom in the same sentence.
Some people would say that's an oxymoron.
Okay.
They decided to do away with modified testing. And so our students who have learning disabilities that are somewhat significant, who were able to take modified testing in the past, are taking the same tests that the general population is taking. And I thought that was a huge disservice to a significant portion of our special education population. We used to be able to determine whether or not a student was going to be taking a modified test or not. And modified just means simple things like simplified vocabulary, larger font, fewer questions on a page so there's less busyness to distract them.
I do that now. I do that with it. Look how big that is.
Yeah. A reduced number of answer choices, so instead of having 4 questions or 4 possible answers, there's 3 possible answers. Those things were all part of the modification process. And I guess I've got to brag a little bit. My 3rd year as a special education teacher, I finally kind of hit my stride, and I had 16 students that I was directly responsible for who took the state test. 4 of them passed it, and 4 of them missed passing by 1 question.
Oh, wow.
So all of a sudden, Mr. Bennett was a superstar on his campus. I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't know that I'd really accomplished anything. I thought I was just doing my job. But I was proud of my students for doing that. But all of a sudden it was, Mr. Bennett, you know what you're doing. Answer this question. Answer me this. Riddle me this, Batman.
Well, is that the year you won that award, that teaching award?
In October of 2013, I was the secondary teacher of the month for our school district.
Okay.
Pretty
That's
unusual.
pretty good.
That's pretty unusual for a special education teacher to get that.
Or for a
But I
3rd-year
think-
teacher.
I think that really it was kind of payback because they came to me and asked me to get an additional certification so I could teach an additional science class. They had a need where they had a class that was, or they had 2 or 3 classrooms that were too full, and they needed to get a general education teacher in there who had a generalized or a cumulative. I needed to have a science certification, a cumulative science that would allow me to teach physics and chemistry as well as biology. And so I went back and took the test. I studied for about a week and then went back and took the test and managed to pass it. So I got an additional certification to teach a science class. And so I think that was probably the award was probably given to me as payback. Hey, thanks for stepping out there.
You made somebody happy.
I made my principal happy.
Okay. Well, this is an unusual job. I had no clue what all this entailed. I know a little bit more about it now because of what David's been telling me. But I'm going to give David a minute or 2 to talk about whatever he wants to talk about in this field. So the floor is yours.
Well, that's dangerous. This is kind of like Open Line Friday on the Rush Limbaugh show. I'm glad that I made the choice to go into education. I wish I'd done it a long time ago. I've looked around our campus, and there are several teachers who have gotten into the education field kind of the way I did. They got alternative certification after working out in the world, and I think they bring some stuff to the table that other folks don't necessarily bring if they've just gone through the traditional way of becoming a teacher, majoring in education.
They're older, for one thing.
Yeah, older, and have a little more. You have a few scars you picked up along the way. I do wish that at the federal level and at the state level we had more people who are educators involved in writing policy for our education. I think that we have a lot of folks in Austin who've never spent any time in the classroom who are writing laws and telling us how to do our jobs, and they've never spent any time.
They tie your hands, don't they?
Well, they make it kind of difficult. I really feel sorry for kind of a lot of our general education teachers. Special ed teachers, yeah, it's where the rubber meets the road is the general education teacher, because they're not only serving the general education population, but they're also serving kids who receive special education services, kids who receive 504 services and supports, and students who are limited English proficient, LEP, second language learners. And so the teachers who really are carrying the load are our general education teachers. And I really wish that we had people who have true educational backgrounds up in Austin writing the laws.
Okay. Maybe you could become a state representative or something.
Oh, I don't know.
After you finish up this career. You know?
Right.
All right. Well, that's it for vocations. And thank you very much for being here, David.
You're quite welcome.
All right. Okay, that's a wrap.